As I'm writing this, I'm about 2/3 through Yakuza 5, reminiscing on the journey of the past 5.5 games, and wondering what lies ahead. It's not that Yakuza 5 is bad or boring. No, it's actually guaranteed to have taken me longer to play through than 3 and 4 combined. But its structure, its pacing, its use of already established features of the series, it made me realize what a turning point for the series as a whole this section of games was. In my first Yakuza video, I praised the series for what it did so damn right, while also acknowledging some of the wrongs it made. But release-wise, those were among the last third of the series. The release timeline goes Yakuza 5, Yakuza 0, Yakuza Kiwami, and then Yakuza 6. That's when it hit me. I'm having nostalgia for a series I haven't even been playing for 6 months. Sure, 6 individual games is a lot to go through, but it's still been a very short amount of time. I've always had Yakuza on the sideline. I have heard of it for at least 10 years, how awesome the series was. Yeah, that long ago. I think I even recall some YouTube video super far back in the day called The Hardest Boss Fight Ever Without Getting Hit, and it was about Yakuza. But I never took the leap until 2020 and fell in so hard. If you've not already seen my first video, I recommend doing so, but let me sum up the intro part. If you haven't played Yakuza for yourself, you definitely should. 0 through Kiwami 2 are a wonderful set of games, even with Yakuza 1's weird pacing in mind. And then we come to the Remastered Collection, a series of games with its own strengths and weaknesses, and that it's a huge departure for the series. These games keep most of what made the later games, release date-wise, great, while still having their own individual charms. And I can just see the cogs turning in the heads of the developers as I progress through the games. I see what they're doing with the characters, their experiments with changing the formula of the series so it doesn't get stale, all these kind of things. And it's really hard to go into them without outright spoiling things. So let's just cut the intro a bit short, alright? Go right into things. Last warning to turn away now. Watch the first video or play the series for yourself while you can. Where Yakuza 0, 1, and 2 are about an ex-Yakuza trying to get by, Kiryu and Majima are both most definitely Yakuza men. Even if by formality he is not a Yakuza, Kiryu is a key pillar of the Tojo clan. And then we get to Yakuza 3, which begins by revealing the biggest plot twist of the series up to even Yakuza 5, I'd say. This plot twist is immediately tossed to the wayside as we get a full reset on Kiryu. Sayama leaves for America, Date is leaving the Force, and Kiryu is actually leaving the Tojo clan to be a good father for Haruka. And Taichi, and Yuta, and Eri, and Riona, and yeah, he goes off to build his own orphanage, just like Kazama before him. But this isn't as a patron, he's actually running it. This is now his job and all he cares about. Well, one of the first issues to deal with is Yakuza related. It's as an orphanage caretaker and father to the kids of Morning Glory that he goes and does it. The aggressors are Yakuza, but they're going after civilian properties and not an ex-Yakuza trying to get by. It just so happens one of the civilians falls under this description. And much of the game falls under this philosophy. Sure, we do eventually and quickly get tangled into a spiderweb of Yakuza betrayal and such, but we stop for many forced story events involving being a parent, getting a dog, dealing with childhood crushes, putting on a wrestling show, all because of being a parent. It has nothing to do with the main plot. It's you being a good dad. And this became the game for me. Screw the ghost of Kazama showing up, or whatever he is, I need to run an orphanage. Of course, that's a bit of a hyperbole. I do care about the actual plot, but that the game immediately undercuts itself with the daily chores of a boring civilian life, and then continues to do it constantly? It's a fantastic way to make the act of being Kazuma Kiryu into gameplay. Kiryu is supposed to be out. He's done with these life or death games to save the Tojo clan. His life is here. Even for the supposed retirement in Yakuza 2, he was still around. At least within earshot of the cemetery, all of his lost loved ones were put to rest. This time he's all the way out in Okinawa. If Kamurocho is in the direct middle of Japan, Okinawa is to the far, far southeast on an island far away. Even considering a surprise visit from Daigo Dojima, the goings-on of the Tojo should have no effect on him. And yet they end up doing just that. In order to protect his new home, he has no choice but to return to the old one. To protect the Tojo is to protect Morning Glory. And in the process we discover a plot that involves multiple factions, now reaching far up into the Japanese government and the American CIA. And while the stakes might not be as high as all of Kamurocho being bombed, for Kiryu they're higher than ever. As I said, we take many breaks to go and be a parent. That's the biggest reason to get involved in this latest plot. An entire family of sons and daughters to protect at all costs. But of course, those are definitely not the only reasons. It's obvious Kiryu still shows some loyalty to the Tojo, if only toward Daigo and Majima. And then there's the matter of Kazuma going around shooting people Kiryu knows. Kazuma is dead. So who is this guy? Kiryu has to find out how and why, and perhaps even find some closure that he never got before leaving for Okinawa. And yet when I think back to the plot and my time with the game, the actual plot isn't there. It's the fathering. Yeah, okay, a few of the major events stick out in my mind, but most of them involve Morning Glory still. A final bit of closure for Kiryu, and one specific scene at the very end that leads into Yakuza 4 were my only real takeaways from the Tojo dealings. And that's what I find so interesting about this game. It's such a shift away from what we knew, what Kiryu knew, what the series itself knows. This is a turning point in what the story of our main character is even about. Even if Kiryu's motivations remain the same, protecting those around him, there's a wide gulf between the before and the now. Of course, that's all about the plot and setting, nothing about the gameplay. To which I want to lead with, notice that 3, 4, and 5 are part of a remastered collection, not a remake collection of Kiwami games. They're just prettied up versions of the original games, meaning it comes with a lot of the same baggage. Everything about Yakuza 3 just feels so stiff compared to the fluidity Kiwami 2 gave us. Oh, sure, I could still Tiger Drop, but in general it's just a huge drop in quality. It feels worse than even Kiwami 1, and I felt like that game was super stiff. Some of the bosses are genuinely awful, especially the second boss of the whole game. And the boss fight finisher heat thing is mashing R2 enough within 10 seconds. This is an amazingly awkward button to mash. This isn't a GameCube controller. DualShock was never a controller I felt mashing the top buttons felt right. Bosses tend to have low enough HP amounts. They're not super long fights if you're doing constant damage at least. So long as you can do damage. A lot of very defensive enemies. So while the HP values are generally low enough, the length of some fights can be extremely long just because you can't get a hit in because of how defensive enemies are. I later read that apparently the game is really built around the parry system, at least this one, and I could believe that, given how difficult some of the bosses could be just for getting a hit in, even if the boss itself was extremely easy. But combat is far from the only element. We have all the minigames. The major one the game itself puts in front of us is Mario Golf. And yes, I know many golf games use this system, but it will always be Mario Golf to me. And you know, it's pretty fun. I mean, it's Mario Golf, of course it's fun. The differences between the Kiwami 2 version of golf are very much appreciated. We also have all the usual ones. Some missions with their own little moments, karaoke, and Hostess Maker. This is an absolute awful minigame. In-building movement is so slow, it's hard to tell what is right or wrong when putting on makeup and accessories. This is so much less fun than running Club Sunshine or Forshine. I hated every moment of it, and I can't see anyone of any persuasion enjoying this version of a Hostess minigame. Positively, Okinawa as a map is really nice. I enjoy it. It's simple and small, but still has a few shortcuts. The days are also extremely bright and sunny. It feels really different with being in a beach area compared to Kamurocho. When you get forced to go back to Kamurocho, you can even feel the difference in the areas, just from day to night. And I honestly miss it now that I know that this is the only game it appears in. Well, maybe it shows up in Judgment or the sequels? On a more mixed note than outright negative is this running around minigame. This is something all of these games use quite a lot, and honestly, I like that it's here to break up the monotony. This is the 4th Yakuza game I've played, and even with the fantastic changes some of the games make between each one, it's all mostly the same combat-wise, especially in this game. There's absolutely nothing special for the game's combat. So instead, we get to chase after people. There is sometimes combat involved in these things, which is extremely simple. Get close, hit the attack button, and that's it. But more key is the fact that you must jump over and around obstacles. Chase down the enemy or beat them up enough before your stamina runs dry. There's short bursts of action and often lead to combat after anyway, but it really does break things up. It's just a shame it often feels either too stiff or too imprecise. Maybe my controller is bugging somehow, but I play other games without issues like I experience in this minigame. Either a 1 degree turn to the left will make Kiryu snap 45 degrees to the left, or holding straight up will make him weeble and wobble like he won't fall down. It feels like I'm controlling drunk Kiryu from Kiwami 2, and it's really weird to me. I think I prefer the way too stiff Kiryu to the wobbly control in the games after. So it breaks up the gameplay in a way I like, but it just doesn't feel good half the time. When you expect it to pick up and throw bottles too, the throws are just genuinely awful to perform. In Yakuza 5, I had far more success just beating enemies over the back of the head till the bottle smashed, because the throw did not snapshot properly ever. But that's Yakuza 5. My point is, this game introduced this minigame, and they continue to use it for at least the next 2 games, and for its faults, I am glad that it is here. But even then, I would call this the worst Yakuza game. It really shifts the idea of what a Yakuza game even is, swapping the side activities and the Tojo clan narratively, and making the side activities more of what Kiryu's life is about. But the feeling of fighting as the Dragon of Dojima in a game focused on combat is far too rough to be enjoyable compared to the others. Similarly rough is Yakuza 4, but it does its own massive change of pace. This comes with its own major shakeup to the series in that we're no longer playing as Kiryu. Even in Yakuza 0, which keep in mind came after Yakuza 4 and 5, we started the game with Kiryu, Majima came second. We instead begin Yakuza 4 with Shun Akiyama, who even speaks of Kiryu as if his tale is finally over, which is super awesome and I love it. We're someone completely new and we're getting completely new insight on Kamurocho, an outsider view on Kiryu and the Tojo. And he plays extremely differently to any style of Kiryu or Majima up to this point. Having a different playstyle does wonders for the combat loop. The specifics don't matter too much, but his main combo is extremely quick and has a high hit count. His heat actions are also nice and pretty flexible for me. It's just, man, he feels way better than Kiryu in Yakuza 3. Still super stiff because it's an old game, but a bit less so since the game is slightly less old. But we're right back into Tojo bullshit once again with the story. But you know, fun Tojo bullshit, and it isn't Kiryu's problem. It's Akiyama's problem, at least for 4 chapters. And then we're whisked away to Taiga Seijima. We've heard a little about him from Majima, especially in Yakuza 0, but now we're actually playing as him. And we have to do a full-on prison break with yet another new playstyle. Seijima makes Beast Kiryu look like a small puppy. He absolutely wrecks face. 3 of them per punch. Hope his enemies have at least 3 spare faces on hand. Like, my god! Where Akiyama is different, but not that different to play, Seijima is so different that it destroys the combat you've been dealing with in the remastered collection thus far. His heavy attack / finisher is a charge attack, and if that lands, does tons of damage. And if you take a specific upgrade or 2, you get a follow-up attack that hits just as hard as the initial charge attack, and can even get a 3rd. If you learn how to properly use Seijima, he's by far the tankiest and canoniest of all the characters, and that includes the 3rd new character. When you finish up with Seijima, you then move on to Tanemura, who in himself has his own playstyle. It's a bit between Akiyama and Seijima. It's a pretty basic moveset, but very useful. He is a god of heat actions. Where Seijima has an upgrade to add a 2nd hit to his charge attack combo, Tanemura starts with those combos and their heat actions. So if you aren't the type of player to hold on to heat, his moveset is for you. Instead of pure damage from combos, you're a heat machine. And it's only then, finally, at the end, Kiryu is forced back into the story. And I kinda mean that. He kinda stumbles into the plot by accident. Really, the plot is stumbling into him. First, when Seijima shows up. After your prison escape with Seijima, you wake up on Kiryu's front porch. Front beach. And then you beat the shit out of him! Oh my god! This is such a cool reversal of everything! Not only are you playing as someone other than Kiryu, you directly opposed him in the main story, if for a moment. This isn't some optional climax battle side mode, this is a main story event. You are fighting Kiryu. The legendary Yakuza we've been playing all series long so far, this godly being, in walks Seijima after 2 decades in prison to scratch the face of God. Like, this moment alone sold me on the game. Even gods couldn't come close to achieving what Seijima does here. Injured and weakened from his escape, he still stands toe to toe with the Dragon of Dojima. But I'm sidetracking here a bit. Something else happens to bring Kiryu into the story, and he really is at this point just accidentally falling into the plot. He even completely intends to not get into the plot. He's brought in against his will. He literally says no to dealing with more Tojo bullshit. He actively denies his history for the first time. So far is he trying to live just a normal life. But he comes in to help people he barely knows, and as a result, ends up in more Tojo bullshit again, and having no idea what is going on. Which, this isn't so much of spoilers, but it is. But before the final boss, everyone meets up like the game implies from the very opening cinematic and agrees that none of them have no fucking clue what is going on. Honestly, I think that's okay. Life is rarely cut and dry. Things are convoluted. That's not a criticism, that's just how some things are, extremely convoluted. The motives and how the villain are all tied together in the most confusing and convoluted of all of the games to this point. It's genuinely messy. And at least half of the final boss encounter just doesn't make sense to me of why it is happening. Which, this is where the actual criticism comes in. Without spoiling either final boss encounter, the final boss section of Yakuza 5 makes it pretty obvious that the protagonist having no idea what is going on is actually the writer saying they have no idea what is going on. This is the fourth game, and they're making extreme narrative structure changes. We're no longer focused on just Kiryu. Honestly, you could take him out and make the fourth character be someone else entirely, and nothing would change. Keep him as a cameo appearance at Morning Glory to progress the plot, and then when Kiryu says no, he actually sticks to it. And the character he says no to is the character you play as, and the story would basically be the exact same playout. But that's me digressing. Even Yakuza 0, which keep in mind was originally only going to be about Majima, and is also a game that came after Yakuza 5, was only about 2 characters. They only had to deal with a 2-pronged story, despite having a dozen characters to have motivation and interactions with. The number of story-important characters isn't really all that different to that of Yakuza 0, but now we have double the number of playable characters, prongs to the story, and viewpoints to said story that they have to write and develop. It can work, it definitely can work, but I think it needed a few more drafts and to be a longer game. Only 3 of the characters actually feel like they matter, and hell, I would even argue that only Akiyama and Seijima matter to the story, and each character only gets 4 chapters to themselves. So we have 16 chapters, but only 4 for a character to be developed. Their rogues gallery of characters to be developed with very little overlap between each character, and then tie it all together in the final chapter. And when you have to develop essentially 3 entirely new characters you did not develop in previous, it just doesn't work here. Again, within a vacuum, this is the 4th game. It's complex and convoluted a story, and the characters being lost is a valid idea. But with hindsight, it becomes painfully obvious that this was not a fun reversal of making Kiryu out to be some genius detective above even Date. He was on track to become patriarch to his own family, so obviously he's got some pretty big brains in that head of his. But Kiryu genuinely seemed to have things all figured out sometimes. Even when he seemed confused, he still had some kind of clue to follow. Here he has literally 0 idea, and that's cool. Only if that was what was intended as a writing detail. And it just saddens me. But I'll get more into that in my Yakuza 5 talk. It just, in retrospect, doesn't work as well as it should. As for the side content, let me just put things into perspective and say, Yakuza 0, as of writing the script, I had 150 hours in. Kiwami, over 67. Kiwami 2, 80. Yakuza 3, the one I think is my least favorite of all of these games, 36 hours. Yakuza 5, 58 hours after beating the final boss. And I do want to play it more because I left some things undone and I do want to play them, like Shinada's side stories. And Yakuza 4, less than 20 hours. I specifically took a huge break between the last video and starting the Yakuza Remastered Collection to avoid burnout. I was only into Yakuza 4 and feeling extreme burnout. And that's just really, really sad for this game. I do want to spend more time on at least Seijuma's side activity, Fighter Maker, when I am done with this video. But Akiyama has more Hostess Maker, which I hated in Yakuza 3, and it's even worse here. It's harder to play. Kiryu is going against a bunch of gangs, which is just a bunch of fighting, nothing special besides beat-up enemies and some mini-bosses. Tanemura's based around his police scanner, but I kinda just skipped it all, but it's a bit more interesting than just combat. I also just kinda spoiled it there, but I have a lot more to say for Yakuza 5. But this game, Yakuza 4, I only rate this one higher than Yakuza 3 because of the fact that we have 4 different playable characters, and that's just fun for what has been 3.5 games of Kiryu. So we have Kiryu changing, actually saying no to the Tojo bullshit, the gameplay changing with 4 characters, the narrative structure changing with 4 characters, and on top of that, Kamurocho is trying to be reinvented. One of the big things I gushed about Kiwami 2 was how Kamurocho changed visually and the new paths through some buildings. Here in Yakuza 4, Kamurocho has a few new areas. We have that inside area next to the Millennium Tower, a little underground shopping mall at the bottom of the map, the sewers, and several places where we can go onto the rooftops. The unfortunate bits are that you really have no reason to take these new paths outside of story-required events or optional content. They're not useful shortcuts like the path next to the tower. They're out of the way, cramped, and just not good or fun to traverse. I do appreciate that they are here. Kamurocho is evolving with the times as it should. So even if in a gameplay aspect the places just feel bad, narratively I am glad they are there. We've also come a long way from the empty lot, and Kamurocho Hills has been in progression for years. Can't wait forever for this one project. The rest of the town must evolve as well. This has been a very downer section overall, but I want to end off on a high note. As I said, this game does have some really cool moments. I love fighting Kiryu. I love that this is more Akiyama's story than anyone's. And I love what it tries to do to shift the series as a whole.
Ore.
Yakuza 5 takes the formula of Yakuza 4, does better with it in every way, adds its own changes, and overall becomes my 3rd favorite of the series, and the absolute highlight of the Remastered Collection. And I am so excited to dive into this one. The game opens once more, not with Kiryu, but someone else. This time, Daigo Dojima. More Tojo bullshit, eh? But then he acts really weird. He picks out a random taxi in a line of them, which is not how taxi lines are supposed to work, and he goes for a ride. He starts talking the ear off the random taxi driver in Nagasugai, before it becomes clear that this random guy that we're going to be playing as is actually Kiryu. Why is Kiryu a taxi driver? Why Fukuoka and not Okinawa? What about Morning Glory? Why is he going by Taichi Suzuki? And he's trying to brush off Dojima saying no to Tojo bullshit just like in Yakuza 4? What is going on? And then he goes to get a meal and Haruka is on TV? Everything we know up to this point is completely upended. At the end of Yakuza 4, the ending kinda implies that Kiryu is going to return to the Tojo, if just for a short visit. And now he's here? Why? We get answers to all these questions, of course, but we also get more questions along the way. One of which being, is Kiryu here because of trying to help his kids, or is he just trying to run from himself? He is even directly asked this question, asks himself of it, and is always reminded that his involvement always seems to get people hurt. We're not playing Kiryu again this time. We're playing as Suzuki. He's not the Dragon of Dojima, he's just some random loser taxi driver, just trying to live a normal life. And it's kind of surreal, really. This is a guy who is borderline PTSD after all the pain he's had to go through. And he's so far away from not only that life, but the life where he seemed like he was finally home, as the man who ran Morning Glory. He finally seemed home, where he belonged. Even Daigo said Morning Glory is where he belongs. And now he's far away from there, too. It gets more surreal. He still has to deal with a brawl here or there, one caused by his own boss, but he otherwise immediately puts back on the mask of Taiji Suzuki. He lets his boss take credit for the first major fight of the game, and then we're given a full-on taxi driving minigame. You have to obey traffic laws, avoid obstacles, use turn signals. It's a full-on side mode of being a taxi driver. That's how far things have gotten. The lead of the Yakuza series has gone on record in an interview as saying he can't bear to make committing crimes fun. Yeah, sure, we're playing a Yakuza, but he never intended to make the Yakuza part and committing crimes part of the actual gameplay. But this is where that kind of idealism seems to really hit its stride. We've gone from being the most famous Yakuza, the most legendary Yakuza ever, to a lowly taxi driver obeying traffic laws. Repeatedly through this section of the story, Kiryu tries to deny himself and his past. He loves his kids, loves Haruka, so much, and he has to deny himself to protect them. And then he is asked, is this really protecting them or himself? And then is capped off with this really, really deep minigame that is kinda half-assed. Okay, let me start with the good stuff. This minigame is amazing and hilarious that it exists at all. I love it, genuinely love it. It's fun, if a bit frustrating having to be a taxi driver. Have you ever tried to play a game like GTA and drive correctly? I actually tried to do that as a fun activity as a kid, because I realized how challenging it would be in a game that expects you to not follow any of the rules. And it's just as difficult in this system, deliberately designed to be a driven correctly game. And it's so compelling. This is Kiryu's daily life now. A mostly silent, stoic, legendary Yakuza driving a taxi like a normal person. From stopping international mafias to driving. But then halfway through the minigame, you entirely stop driving the taxi. They're just little cutscenes with dialogue choices, And it's so disappointing. Often just ending in basic fights too. Or just ending. Nothing interesting. Like, I get maybe it would have been exhausting to have to do a ton of driving missions that last a while, but I think most of the missions involve no taxi driving at all. This is especially disappointing because this is actually 2 minigames. The other side of this minigame is we are racing Initial D style. And if you just heard that and are wondering, I don't know what that is, yes, you know exactly what that is. And at least every mission about this side of the story involves racing. There's only 3 track layouts, so it gets old really fast, but it's amazing in concept. We're going full Initial D, drifting and boosting across the highway as a second half to the minigame about obeying the law as best you can and being a good, safe driver. There's even some minor tuning elements you can do. For the most part, it's just linear upgrades to make your car perform better, but there's like 2 options for an endgame build. But even for a super basic customization system, this is super fun. The driving is super satisfying despite how simple the side game is. That's the thing though, I guess. Anyone who sucks at driving games, you can easily beat both sides of this side game. The taxi driving is slow and specifically about normal driving, so it's quick to learn. The racing, meanwhile, is super basic, easy to control, and puts every advantage on your side of the field. You can even use heat actions in races. There's a super speed boost down the final straightaway that guarantees you win almost any race. A truck dodging skill that I don't get why it even exists, and a drift skill that skips like the entirety of the difficult section of the track. Like, it does undercut the idea of Kiryu living a boring life now. High-octane death races are kinda at odds with being a normal taxi driver, but it's uniquely stupid in a way only Yakuza can pull off. This is the game series with 24-hour Cinderella, telephone clubs, and so many other stupid minigames that just work. And that's why this one works too, and why it's so crushing when we move on. Especially so when you consider this racing game actually made me cry. Find out for yourself why, if you dare. Eventually, Kiryu gets thrown into Yakuza bullshit once again, and actually considers cutting himself off when he finishes up his work in Fukuoka. But then we get a major plot twist, and he has no choice but to get involved, as we swap over to the second character, Seijima. Once again, we are stuck in prison, and it's very slow. It drags on. This section is just a find the needle in a haystack with very little proper plot progression until yet another escape attempt. He wants to get out to figure out what all is going on with the Tojo bullshit, but we learn very little unique info in this section, and the gameplay of it is so slow, it almost feels like all filler. But at least after escaping prison, we have Seijima's minigame, Hunting. We're playing a hunting side game now. It's a relatively big map, and you can use traps for smaller creatures, collect mushrooms and other small items, have to actually aim for vital points, mostly headshots, and it has an entire skill system as well. The skills are of huge help in progression, and that's how you get them too, progression. There's very little to do besides progression. You can hunt over and over, but that's to grind money, and that's about it. There's a theme that becomes clear with this side game, and that's that they all feel half-assed at points. Well, I say that, but we'll get to it. I love the taxi and racing. I love this hunting, but it's so basic. There could be so much more, but it's a side game to a Yakuza game. It's far more complex than the basic minigames like darts, but stops far short before it becomes too hard for a more casual player of the genre. I can at least appreciate and respect that much. I want more depth, but they can't or they risk turning away people from the subgame if the entire idea itself doesn't do that. I mean, look at Mahjong. I'm sure that one's extremely divisive. This hunting one especially, though, since precision shooting with a controller isn't exactly a thing, and you only have 2 shots per reload, so it's hard enough to get a good shot. If you miss, you only have 1 chance to correct it before a slow reload. Complexity beyond this, and they would probably ruin it for most people. At least they let us have Taiga Dragon Drop for Seijima as way of apology. When you're done hunting, we head into town and see Seijima also has a snowball fight side game too, which isn't listed as an actual side game. I didn't bother with it at all because the story bits of Seijima were just boring me to bits after the fun hunting section. It's pretty obvious what is going on, but also it doesn't make any sense. This is where it starts to come into focus how Yakuza 4's confusion bit was a bit of a mistake and not intended. Seijima's Chapter 4 ends on such a confusing note, and results in part of the final boss that just doesn't make sense at all. And then Yakuza 5 jumps 12 sharks while doing a kickflip on a motorcycle. We're now literally just playing Hatsune Miku. I've played one before because of a friend in college. They're fun if you enjoy rhythm games, and I'm sure even more enjoyable if you understand what the fuck is going on with Hatsune Miku, unlike I did. But I understand music and rhythm games, which I have tons of fun with, and now instead of playing as a big, muscle, punchy man, we're playing a teen girl training to become an idol. Holy fuck. Reading the Steam forums one day, a big mistake, never do that. I saw a topic that was very divisive. Some people really hate this section. I guess because they suck at rhythm games, even though just like the racing game, it's super leaning in your favor, it's super easy. But something that everyone seemed to agree on, whether they realized they were agreeing or not, was that this was an extremely well done section in emulating how idols work. Like, yay, well, hey, we're having so much fun playing Hatsune Miku and dancing and doing rhythm games with happy, smiley music, and then immediately after being smacked in the face with the reality of how this business works. It's ruthless, objectifying children for audience amusement. You even have a mini-game with this side game that is a handshake event, and you specifically have to keep fans happy. Especially the super creepy otaku who sniff their hands after you send them away. This series that has done so much social commentary on the Yakuza, the nature of being a person, questioning who you are inside and your history, destiny, and so much else, is now making a commentary on idols. Once again, it's all simple enough for anyone else to succeed at the minigame and still entirely fun. The difficult stuff, relatively, is the dance battle side of the gameplay. Health and heat and skills actually come into play. This bit is basically all optional, but man is it fun. There's so much more to this than just rhythm. There's attacking and defending with skills. You can take damage and have to heal up if you're doing poorly. And unlike the basic progression of Hatsune Miku sections, you're actually playing multiple songs from fight to fight. Yeah, there's 3 songs for the Hatsune Miku section, but you basically know what you're getting into per section of the story. But it's not all just menus. We're back in Sotenbori, and we're exploring it as Haruka. She has sub-stories and dance battles, but they're not random encounters like our big muscle men. They're 100% avoidable with no real effort. It's such a different experience to be able to explore an entire town unaccosted. You'd think that as an idol she'd get accosted a lot, But hey, I like being able to explore the town without being stopped every 5 seconds. Apparently you are also able to safely fail all of Haruka's missions and the story will still continue. This is a game series about brawling, so changing genre and expecting the player to succeed is kinda bad design, so they don't! Irony? Or genius? I don't know, we'll see when I get to 7, but apparently the fact that it's an RPG is actually really good anyway, so... So no matter if you're good, if you train Haruka's skills to make her a better idol or not, play the minigames or etc., you end up in the Princess League event. And then Dulce Kamiya shows up. There's an internal consistency to Yakuza that the developers try very hard to keep up with little winks and nods, ones that continue to make me laugh and surprised as they show up. Dulce Kamiya showing up was one such a huge shock to me. Genuine excitement over a character from a single submission returning for a main story appearance. Even if technically the character appeared in Yakuza 5 first, and then in Yakuza 0 second, I genuinely shouted out loud when he showed up. This is part of the commentary that makes Yakuza amazing as a series. In Yakuza 3, randomly in the main story, this troubled couple will show up and Kiryu will go, "Oh, them again." Wait, them again? Who are these people? You've never seen them before. Unless you did the submissions of 1 and 2. This couple shows up in both 1 and 2, and you help them out, and this is canon. Submissions are canon. Yakuza 3 even encourages you to help them out again, even if this is still technically a side story. Kiryu, Seijima, Akiyama, Tanemura, and Majima are all the kinds of guys who would actually actively help in these stupid side missions. As a result, it is canon that Kiryu voices in a Boys Love video game. It's those little moments, those surprises that make Yakuza so amazing. Every little story can affect a person. That's just how life works. The little moments can be life-changing. Helping out a couple can see them on their honeymoon or some such. The developers are trying to make a large, consistent world, and then Dulce Kamiya shows up out of nowhere. Again, I don't care that Yakuza 0 technically came after this game and would be fresh on their minds. Being introduced to this character and showing up for Haruka's life-changing journey? It's magical. But then you remember that the introduction was that Haruka was part 1 to chapter 3. After 2 sections of being Hatsune Miku, we reach part 2, and Akiyama shows up out of nowhere. I guess they needed 4 main battle protagonists and a reason for Haruka to be involved in the main battle plot without making her fight, which her fighting wouldn't make sense at all. She's been training to be an idol, not lifting weights to catch up to Uncle Kaz. Her suddenly becoming a buff woman in the middle of Tojo bullshit wouldn't make sense, especially given the plots of the last games. It would just be out of character. She wants Uncle Kaz out of the Yakuza game more than Uncle Kaz wants out of the Yakuza game. I could maybe see Park having secretly been a buff woman who could kick Tojo ass. That would have been interesting maybe, and potentially make me not completely hate her. But as it stands, Akiyama needs to come in and join Haruka as a bit of a tag team, both for solving the Tojo bullshit, and for helping Haruka continue to be an idol. It's a bit of a symbiotic relationship, even if Akiyama might not have stuck around if this wasn't Kiryu's daughter. He's still a lovable asshole, but this time he's the one that feels out of place in the story. As boring as Seijima's story was to get through, he is clearly in the forefront of who is important to the plot going on with the Tojo. Akiyama and Haruka? It's more of a side effect of the main plot than actually part of the main plot. Once again, the main story this time around is super convoluted and confusing, but characters understand what is generally going on better than most. Mostly. But you could basically take out this section and, while the plot would be far less complete, the main structure would be the same. There's a few missing pieces that rub me a wrong way, but at least it isn't as bad as with 4. Not nearly as close. They do at least give Akiyama a Super Saiyan ability to make him a bit more unique in this game, so I guess it's okay they brought him in. I'll talk more about this soon in the combat section. For now, let me say Akiyama has some of the best sub-stories in this game, some absolute hilarity and emotional payoff. His main and most important sub-story especially. Makes sense, since they seem to get rid of the playable ensemble cast in 6. And now we get to the final part. Shinada sucks, and I hate everything about him. I mean it. Okay, this part of the story does have some cool twists and elements, but the amazing moments Shinada has are not worth the rest of him. His arc is good, but his purpose as a character in this story feels half-assed. If he had his own self-contained story, I think I would have been fine with him. But within the context of Yakuza 5, he just doesn't work. And this is where I will springboard into talking about the game as a general whole. Starting off with the combat. Shinada is an ex-baseball player, and so his moveset is based on such. And by that I mean he has one good combo, his 3 light hits into a strong hit combo, and it has him mock swing a bat. This is a very good combo, and basically the only one I ever used. It's fast, it does higher damage, and it's the only one that ever seemed to work for me. Only when an enemy seemed to always block that bat swing did I ever try other combos. Only for them to get blocked too anyway, meaning the solution was just to counter and bat swing at the right times. Or just get behind them and bat swing. Then there's the second heavy attack press you can do. In Yakuza 4, I praised Tanemura for having a follow-up where he would do a heat action. And Shinada is directly analogous to Tanemura in that way, but instead of a heat action, you do a My Media Tackle. And Media Tackle sucks. It's pretty good for crowd control when you finally understand how it works, but crowd control is rarely an actual issue that can't be solved by normal means. Normal means that do more damage than the My Media Tackle. Maybe I'm just using it wrong or something, but it does so low damage and seemed to always move me out of position when I was in a good one. Or stun me because I accidentally used it next to a wall, and running an enemy into a wall comes with a huge recovery animation. So you do no damage, open yourself up to attack by accident, and go back to spamming the same combo over and over anyway. What's worse is that he does get a heat action for a third press of the button. Bat swing, media tackle, and then during the media tackle, an upgrade will let you interrupt the tackle with an action that throws the enemy onto their back, for minimal damage. Any other heat action would do far more damage. Tanemura's heat actions did more, and they required one less button press. It's cheap, easy damage, but so was, say, Tanemura heat actions. I can at least appreciate the story gameplay integration that Shinada refuses to use bats as weapons, but it's just, ugh. Seijima and Kiryu are basically the same as they were in the last game. Tiger-dropping fools and the same abilities. Kiryu's gotten boring, but at least he's consistently good, and Seijima is a blast to play. Oh, and just like Media Tackle, Seijima has a heat action after a third heavy attack hit. Charge for the first hit, follow up with a combo hit upgrade, and then upgrade to slam enemies down anytime you cause them to bounce on the ground, which your follow-up combo attack basically always does. And it actually does damage, unlike Shinada. Seijima also has Tiger Puppetry, which I didn't ever use, when his normal attacks are better and can easily be turned into crowd control, which seems like to be the purpose of taiga puppetry. I don't know. Kiryu himself is fun to play through still. I won't say he's bad to play here. The control of Yakuza 5 is a huge step up over 3 and 4. I feel much more in control again. Like I said previously, it's just that we've been playing Kiryu for so long, and the age of these games means you can't go as crazy as you would in, say, Kiwami 2. Hell, the level up system in these games are all the same. Boring and not even worth mentioning beyond this throwaway line. Kiryu's special gimmick in Yakuza 5 is the Super Saiyan Heat mode that makes him do more damage and is just a waste of heat when you could just do heat actions in this game. Akiyama, meanwhile, has this really weird Super Saiyan attack string. You can launch enemies up into the air, then combo them to hell and back while in the air. I'm in two minds about this one. It's actually pretty cool when you pull it off right, but pulling it off is a pain in the ass. Any enemy that cannot be launched into the air with a standing heavy attack is automatically off limits, essentially. Further, enemies can block it extremely easily. More often than not, even normal enemies were blocking my launch moves. Anytime I did launch an enemy, it was usually by accident. And then there's the huge costly heat. I guess the heat to damage ratio is comparable, or even in Super Saiyan's favor compared to other heat actions. Worst off though, is that it's always a single enemy. My favorite heat actions are always the crowd control ones, not just because it was crowd control, which is my main issue with Shinada's heat tackle, but because it's high damage crowd control. I'm pretty sure it was nerfed here, but in Yakuza 3, Kiryu's emergency break the arms of 4 enemies attack would consistently take out all 4 enemies it hit in one shot. At worst, knock down one enemy, grab another, and use the heat action to throw the grabbed enemy on top of the other. If it doesn't take out both enemies, it did massive damage to both of them. It's cool, the damage is actually decent enough, but there's better options for how I would sum it up. It doesn't match my playstyle. Maybe if it was more consistent to pull off, I would use it to thin out crowds here and there, but as it is, it's not worth it. At least to me. Better than my media tackle, though. Let me say, though, this game had the best change. Hold L2 to prevent yourself from using heat actions. So many times that an enemy is on the ground, one hit from death, and I have heat. I don't want to grab, I want to just kick them. I can't, or I use heat. Not in Yakuza 5, just hold L2 and you win. You won't use heat. This got so much use out of my playthrough, and it made it so much better than my time with 3 and 4. I don't like Shinada's baseball minigame either. Like, it's neat and better than most of the baseball games in the series, but I don't like baseball games to begin with. I can tell there is plenty of love put into this, but as a side game, I'm going to complete it, but I won't like it. Baseball just isn't for me. That's not exactly Yakuza 5's fault, and I better get used to it because I know that it comes back still in Yakuza 6 as a major side game. But this is also why I'm glad that they're not too complex, and I see why the other minigames aren't as complex. I don't like baseball, and a super complex baseball minigame would turn me off so much from the minigame. I can at least complete this minigame, and by this point I actually have in the recording of this voice clip, and not just writing the script. But I mean, yeah, I'm glad that they're not going too far with the side games, even if I want more with some of the other side games. But I also don't like his town. Though that could be said more than just for Shinada, but his town of Nagoya is just so annoying to me. Taxis are in rough spots, the junk in the middle of roads and sidewalks gets in the way, and generally it's just boring to look at. But I think that all is a side effect of that they made 3 new maps for this game. Seijima gets to explore Sapporo, which is just a huge pain to traverse. It's huge despite having so little in it. It's a giant line running north to south with several other giant lines jutting out. At least with how huge Kamurocho is, there's so many side streets and paths to take, and the taxis are in decent spots. Sapporo, it's just one giant line. The few shortcuts you do get aren't exactly much shorter to go through than the long ways. Akiyama and Haruka get to explore Sotenbori again, which it's always nice to visit Sotenbori. The long, uninterrupted paths in the north are forgivable because of it being not that long, and only the north part of the map. And then there's my favorite of the new maps, Nagasugai. Kiryu's town is by far the most realized due to the taxi minigame. Obviously they needed the town to be well constructed for the taxi game to work. It comes with plenty of problems though. The positions of taxis are a bit of off-kilter to me, though that could be town design, with the locations being natural hotspots to a real town would place taxis. My want for a taxi stop in front of the taxi station might not make sense in reality. Really though, it's not much more designed than any of the other new towns. The angled roads make you feel like there's more to it than there is, and they're long. Not as long as Seijima has, but it's a big town still. It's also very pleasant to look at. It's just a beautiful city, something both Sapporo and Nagoya lacked for me. The big reason I target Shinada and not Seijima though, is that this comes fourth and last, immediately after Sotenbori, which is amazing and I love Sotenbori, but also because I enjoyed Shinada so little. His combat is bad, his character is a bit rough, which leaves room for growth that he needed an entire game for, really needed an entire game for, and his place in the story is just bad. I was a bit hard on Akiyama and Haruka, but that was a bit of a lie. The main Tojo plot, yeah, they have basically no real connection to it. They're just tied in by tiny strings off the rope that is the main plot. But that is by going under the assumption that, while good, that the Tojo bullshit is the main plot. Where I've been talking about how Kiryu was fighting against joining into more Yakuza issues in 3 and 4, the Tojo stuff still felt like the main plot. Here in Yakuza 5, Tojo isn't the main plot anymore. The main plot for Yakuza 5 is Haruka's story. Haruka and Kiryu as people. Getting tied up in yet another Tojo plot is the side effect of this game. And when you consider the game in that light, Shinada is even less important than ever. Kiryu and Shinada share a whole 3 sentences together in the entire game. The final boss Shinada gets is actually something that solved itself. Shinada could have died on the way to his final boss encounter, and the story would have ended the same way. Like, I don't want to go super deep into it because spoils, but like, it's ridiculous. Again, with his own little world, Shinada is actually pretty good. Half-baked because of only having 4 chapters to develop, but he just does not fit here. He's not fun to play, not fun to explore his town, and not fun to deal with his story because it's a different story, barely connected by the tiniest thread to a Tojo plot. Connected to the main plot, that is, Haruka and Kiryu. And there's no way around it. This is where the story spoilers finally kick in. There is a very obvious theme to this game. Dreams. And even Shinada manages to have a fantastic relation to this theme. Shinada just wants to be wanted, not as some famous baseball star, but as a normal person. Akiyama wants to become a legend on par with his friend Kiryu. Not as just some simple, selfish wish to be famous, but because of his history. Though I'm sure part of that selfish wish does come into play. And Seijima just wants closure with his brother. The dream to be top of the Tojo clan with his sworn brother Majima. Then we focus in on Kiryu and Haruka. Main story of Yakuza 5, their dreams. Haruka is being dragged in two directions. She loves her Uncle Kaz. She owes everything to him, and has to pretend he does not exist. To be an idol, she has to be a perfect little kid. Having the most famous Yakuza to ever live as a father would be bad for business. Her dream is to be an idol. Or is it? Is this really what she wants? Or would she rather just be home being a normal girl, with her Uncle Kaz and all her brothers and sisters until they are old enough to go their own ways? She says she wants to be a success, but there's always that flicker of doubt you can sometimes even see. What really is Haruka's dream? And then there's Kiryu. I already mentioned Kiryu is asked of why he is truly out in Fukuoka. Is he here to give Haruka her shot at stardom and to save Morning Glory? Or is he just running from himself? From his history as the Dragon of Dojima? What is his dream? What does Kiryu want in life? He was beholden to the Tojo, always showing up to save them from the brink of disaster. But he is trying to say no now. No to Daigo of all people. No to everyone trying to drag him into Tojo garbage. He's trying to live a silent life as a taxi driver. But is this what he really wants? The answers to these questions, and the dreams of everyone else as well, make for an ending almost as good as Yakuza 2, but it's only almost. I mentioned how Yakuza 4's ending just doesn't seem like it was thought out. Yakuza 5's ending treads some of the same ground, on top of Shinada feeling shoehorned in. His final boss literally solves itself with or without his intervention. Hell, he causes more problems than helps in his final boss. The actual villain of the game has a plan that makes sense, even if the final reveal seems out of nowhere. And that out of nowhere reveal, the true final boss, literally says he has no idea why he is here. The entire fight is amazing, it's super hype, really fun, and just a great capstone to the game. But as for the story connection, it's just a mess. You can't have him say, "I don't know why I'm here," without actually having well-established reasons for him to be here, and actually it's a commentary on him not knowing if he should be here. Should he be here? He's conflicted, but I don't feel like he's conflicted. He just literally doesn't know why he's here. But the post-fight scenes? Absolutely fantastic. It ties everything up into a nice bow, even if the events that got here are a mess, both in the good and bad way. But there was no real emotional payoff for the fight. Okay, there was, but okay. I want you to listen to some short clips of the final boss themes of Yakuza 3, 4, and 5. Here. They're good songs, I'll never deny that. But they're not Yakuza 2. They're not scattered light. Ryuji Goda is built up over the whole game. He's given real motivations, beliefs, and you actively want to beat him. Show him he's wrong. It's a battle of ideals. All the reveals, all the plots to destroy Zatojo, they take a back seat. This is a battle of destiny between two men who, in another life, would have been best friends. It's not a battle of good and evil, just two men striving to reach for the top. This is a personal fight, and it feels personal for the player too. An all-out slugfest with who is probably the most honorable Yakuza villain in the series, up to Yakuza 5 at least. All of the underhanded stuff you feel like he pulls or does not pull, he's still acting under his own code of honor. He even helps Kiryu save Haruka. He could have killed Kiryu, weakened and bloodied already. He wants a fair fight instead, and this theme sells the fight completely. Even for as amazing I think Yakuza 5's final boss is, the music didn't sell me. I wasn't emotionally invested in who the final boss was either. I just wanted to punch the dude in the face. And so I did. And I Tiger dropped him too. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't Goda. It wasn't the best Yakuza can be. There's a lot more I can talk about, but you can see the length of this video already. This set of games was worth experiencing, especially Yakuza 5. You can feel the evolution of the series, evolution of the characters, and it begs the question of what comes next. Well, the Song of Life comes next. Originally, I heard that the Song of Life was the best Yakuza game. Since then, I've heard more mixed opinions on the game, but I'm not going to let that color my experience. I will probably take another break before playing it. I expected to have much less to say on these games than 0, 1, and 2, but Yakuza 5 alone was such a good experience, I couldn't stop talking about it. If nothing else, I am now extremely excited to play Yakuza 6, and that is going to get its own video. It deserves it, because it's the end. The end of the Kiryu saga. And while this is for my secondary channel and not the main channel, which is all Final Fantasy XIV and stuff like that, I'm still gonna thank all my patrons. And the extra special thanks, as usual, to Arya Deva, Ayman Al-Khatib, Benjamin Hahn, Body Clock, Ethan Olsen, Evan, Jamie Cotterill, Kyle Steinhauser, Meowfie, Mizella, Scott Stanley, Valor LLC, and Yvonne the Moose. Links down below for all the good stuff. See you next time, whenever that's gonna be.